And our speaker is Bob Consigli. And I just want to say a couple of words about Robert. He was one of the first on the scene when the Tucson Civil War Roundtable was formed. He was one of our founders, and he's been with us from the get-go. They recently relocated from Cooperstown, New York, and I really hate him for that, because I was planning to come to stay with him when I went to the Hall of Fame, but I didn't make it. So, but they've relocated to Pennsylvania to be close to family, and he has presented to our group in the past, and we look forward to hearing about the Kentucky campaign of 1862. So, Robert, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Gene, for your introduction. I have this thing in the middle of my screen. This meeting is being recorded by the host, and it says I can't get rid of it. Just leave it on. Does it matter?
You know, I bet you can get rid of it.
I can't find my cursor.
Okay, well then don't worry about it. You just go right on.
Okay. Well, I want to first thank everybody for attending the meeting. And I'm going to divide it basically into 4 areas. The first area will be very familiar to everyone, because I'm going to try to compare what was happening in the East and what was happening in the West in 1861-62 to sort of set the background for what occurred for the Kentucky campaign. And then I'm going to go into Kentucky a little bit and see what's happening there in 1861-62, which is important to know before we actually get to the campaign. And then we're going to get to the actual campaign, which doesn't begin until after the Shiloh battle. And it doesn't really begin until May of 1862, June of 1862. So, and then I'll get into the actual campaign that occurred at that point. Also, during the talk, I'm going to mention 3 key figures, and I'll give a little bit of background on them when I get to them. And that is Don Carlos Buell, Kirby Smith, and Braxton Bragg. These are the 3 figures that play a prominent role in the Kentucky campaign of 1862. So I just want to start by going back to what was occurring, because there are kind of similarities in the East and West in 1861-62, and there are big differences. First of all, in the East, the area was confined to roughly 100 miles, the front, between the James Peninsula and the Appalachian Mountains in and around Richmond and Washington. And it basically depended on 2 armies, the Army of the Potomac and the Army of Northern Virginia. And these are what was occurring in that time was that the Army of Northern Virginia was beating back in 1862, early 1862, McClellan's attempts to capture Richmond on the peninsula. And with the Confederate victory there, McClellan retreated back to the Rappahannock, and he had to go from there, but there were a lot of other disappointments with the Union, ending up with the Second Manassas in August of 1862. And finally, with Lee's thrust into Maryland, which is one of the border states that I'll be talking about, and which that was turned back. Now in the West, the area was much bigger, roughly from the Cumberland Gap, which was in eastern Kentucky and eastern Tennessee, all the way to Columbus, Missouri, roughly about 900 miles. So you had a much larger front, and you had more than 1 or 2 armies. There were several armies involved. And as you know, with many armies involved, there were a lot of personality problems with the generals that were in charge of this, and I'll be discussing that. So that's basically what happened in 1862 in the West. Was kind of a reversal. The Union was more successful. They penetrated the Tennessee River and it went down to Shiloh. So they were much more successful than the armies in the East. The Confederate Army in the East was much more successful than the Confederate armies in the West in 1862. So that's basically the background. What I'd like to go now is to get to, if I can, my presentation. Hold on. Can you see anything?
Okay, so we're seeing your first slide.
Yeah, I'm trying to get to
And
my,
if you can't find your cursor, Bob,
yes,
just look at your keyboard and see if you have an arrow that points towards the right.
yes.
How about pressing that? See what happens.
Makes a lot of noise.
It has a noise.
Well.
Okay,
the
there
first-
you go. You did it. Well
Okay.
done.
I'm just going to, I don't know, I can't see my whole slide. Can you see the whole slide of Kentucky?
Yes, we're seeing the slide. We're not seeing that annoying little message you're seeing.
Okay, that's right in front of my presentation, but that's okay. I'm going to just look at the state of Kentucky for a minute. Now, Kentucky was one of the border states, and in my opinion, was the key border state. It really projected much further north than the other two, and which was Missouri and Maryland. And Kentucky had a very active and very vociferous secession group in the state. And so, and they were very instrumental in urging the Confederate Army in 1862 to start the Kentucky campaign that I'm going to be talking about. If you look at Kentucky, basically, when the war broke out in 1861, Kentucky was attempting to remain neutral. It had a very strong group in Kentucky that believed that they should try to remain neutral, try not to take sides. And in the election of 1860, Breckinridge, which is a Southern Democrat, only received 37% of the vote, which gave you an idea of how important the middle group in Kentucky was, the ones that didn't want to get rid of slavery, but they didn't want to take the side of the extreme radical slavery people down in South Carolina. Bell, who was one of the ran the Constitutional Party, kind of a person who came after Henry Clay in Kentucky, who attempted to establish what is called the American system. Bell was to preserve the Union and not taking sides. And between Bell and Douglas, who was the Northern Democrat, they received about 67% of the vote. So it gave you an idea of where most of the Kentucky people were. Lincoln, by the way, who was a native son, got very few votes in Kentucky at the election of 1860. So there was a big attempt by the legislature and the governor, who were both fighting each other, to try to remain neutral when the war broke out. The governor, Magerland, was pro-secession. However, he was hampered by the legislature, which was pro-union, and they fought each other in terms of who was going to have dominance in the state. And it eventually worked out that the Northerners in the legislature dominated and passed legislation which was not neutral, although Kentucky was officially a border state and officially neutral. When the war broke out, the Southerners had the border. I'll go back to the map between Tennessee and Kentucky. The Southerners had their armies down below that line, and they were attempting to bring Kentucky into the Confederate orbit. The circle on your left around Paducah, you all see that? That area of Kentucky was very close in terms of where the armies were. The Confederate armies with Polk and Pillow were south of the line in Kentucky, and Grant and the Union Army was above in Illinois, in Carroll, Illinois, right above Paducah. So they were roughly very close to each other. So that was going to be a hot spot if anything was going to happen because they were so close. Meanwhile, when Albert Sidney Johnson, who took over the command of the Confederate Army in mid-1861, he decided to cross the border and establish his line of troops from Paducah, from that area, all the way through Bowling Green, all the way to the Cumberland Gap. And he established a line of defense, but they have now crossed the border. And so the Union felt comfortable in bringing troops down from Indiana, Ohio, and Illinois into Kentucky, basically in Louisville, Kentucky, where they established a big, strong Union garrison. And in December of 1861, Don Carlos Buell was given command of the Army of the Ohio. He was given command of that army basically because his friend McClellan encouraged people in Washington to give him the command. They were both friends, and they also had similar political views. They had similar views about how to use the army. Both of them were Democrats. Buell was married to a Southern woman. He was also, they accused of being kind of pro-Southern in his sentiment, even though he remained loyal to the Union. He was also very conservative in terms of how to use military forces. He didn't want to take chances. He wasn't a risk taker like McClellan. He was slow in doing what he had to do in terms of getting his army together. However, he was a great organizer, and that's probably why McClellan selected him, and the Department of War approved it, because when he came to Louisville, he inherited a mess, and he quickly shaped up the Union troopers there, who were kind of raw recruits, and made them into kind of a fighting force. So he was instrumental in shaping up the Army of the Ohio in Northern Kentucky. Okay. Lincoln was concerned about Kentucky. As you know, he felt that it was very, very important that Kentucky remain in the Union. McPherson, the historian McPherson, claimed that if the three border states, Missouri, Kentucky, and Maryland, supported the Southern cause, they would bring tremendous resources to the Southern cause in terms of manpower, industry, and control of the Ohio, possible control of the Ohio River. So it was very, very instrumental that Lincoln felt that this state, especially Kentucky, remain neutral. And he tried to do that, as you know, and he was kind of successful, because in the beginning it was neutral, and eventually it became pro-union in terms of the legislature, and eventually a new governor. However, there are a lot of people in Kentucky who were slaveholders. I believe Kentucky was the third state after Georgia and Virginia that had the most slaves. So there was a large slave population in Kentucky and a lot of slaveholders in Kentucky. So they were not very happy about what was happening. And this group of secessionists from Kentucky formed what later became known as the Kentucky Bloc, who went to Richmond claiming they were the real government of Kentucky. And in December of 1861, they convinced Davis and the Congress of the Confederacy to make Kentucky an official state of the Confederacy. And they went so far as giving it a star in the new Confederate flag, although Kentucky by that time was controlled by Union forces. It's kind of interesting. I didn't know that. Okay. And what happened in Kentucky? Well, I just went over that. By May 16th, 1861, the Kentucky legislature voted to remain neutral on both sides, but this would not last. The Confederates established a defensive line along the northern border of Tennessee and later moved it up into central Kentucky. And Albert Sidney Johnson took command of the Confederate forces at Bowling Green, which was basically, if you look at the map, look at back, basically down in the center of Kentucky, in the middle of Kentucky. But he had very few troops, and he had to cover a lot of ground. In Kentucky itself, they're established, even though they were supposed to be neutral, there were two groups of armed men who were opposing the secession and favoring the secession. There was the State Guard. It was led by Bruckner, and there was the Home Guard, controlled by the legislature. Both of them were armed, although the Union Home Guard was better armed because Lincoln had the Ohio and Illinois people send them weapons. They sent them about 5,000 guns to arm them, so they were better armed than the Confederates. However, there was this, who's going to take what side? And Kentucky is a very good example of brother fighting brother, because there were a lot of towns where there was a real division between those who wanted to stay in the Union and those who wanted to secede the Confederacy. So there was a lot of that going on in Kentucky. As I said, the first Union commander in Kentucky in 1861 was Anderson, the fellow who was at Fort Sumter. But he was very sickly and wasn't very much of a controlled kind of person and didn't know what to do, but more or less. So that in December of 1861, Don Carlos Buell was given command of the Army of the Ohio. Cairo became a mustering point, same as Louisville. And the Confederate incursions along the Kentucky border into central Kentucky were met by Union responses. But they didn't really take major responses until early 1862. In early 1862, the Union started taking offensive action against the Confederates that were now in central Kentucky, stationed at Bowling Green. For example, and by around Paducah, Grant took Paducah and didn't stop there, as you know. Halleck encouraged him to proceed to capture Fort Henry, which is on the map, and which he did, and he also captured Fort Donelson. So this was going on in Western Kentucky. The Union was establishing a very strong military position in that area. In Eastern Kentucky, in the Cumberland Gap area, the Confederates lost in several skirmish battles. I call them skirmishes. They weren't really major battles, but they lost, and they lost control of the Gap, the Gap. And Johnson realized in Bowling Green that he couldn't stay there because he'd be surrounded by Union troops. So he decided to retreat. And he went further down south, as we all know, ending up eventually past Shiloh into Corinth, Mississippi, which is south of Cairo, where the Confederates established their strong point for the next assault on the Union forces. So Johnson retreats, goes with the Confederate Army, and the people back down in Corinth, Mississippi. On the eastern part of Kentucky, the Confederates retreat back into Knoxville, Tennessee. There was a problem with Eastern Tennessee. As you know, Lincoln really favored Union activities in Eastern Tennessee because he felt that area, and it was, more pro-Union than pro-secession, and he wanted to support them. And he did, and by capturing the Gap. But the Confederates never left Knoxville, Tennessee, and that's important to keep that in mind. Okay, I'm going to go back. I could. Now I can't move my slides. Okay. Hold on. Okay, here's Carlos Buell. Just say a few things about him. You probably know a lot about him. I'll just give you a quick rundown of his background. That's a picture of him. As you know, he took charge of the Army of the Ohio in December of 1861. He replaced Sherman, by the way. Sherman, during that period of time, they claim became very depressed, couldn't really handle the troops. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but that's what the story is. Buell graduated from West Point in 1841. He fought all the major battles in the Mexican War. He was wounded several times. He was cited for gallantry. He was brevetted in major in the Army. He was known for organization. He was known to discipline the troops, a good reputation. And in 1859 to 1861, he became assistant to the Secretary of State Floyd, who you know was a kind of a pro-Southern person in the cabinet. And he did very well there. He did so well that when the war broke out, he was given a commission, and he fought in the East in mid 1861 until he was appointed to command the Army of the Ohio by the War Department, encouraged by McClellan. He, like McClellan, believed in over preparation, making sure his troops were well supplied, well disciplined before he would do anything. So he was kind of a slow actor in maneuvering troops and bringing troops onto the confrontation with the Southern forces. And his major fear was, or his major concern was, that the Union should control and capture Nashville, Tennessee, which is approximately halfway down the state. And he felt this was very, very important because it was a terminal of the Nashville-Louisville Railroad. And Buell liked to follow railroads, and he would make sure that coming from Louisville, when Johnson retreated down to Corinth, that he would come down and he'd occupy Nashville with the Army of the Ohio. And he felt Nashville was very, very important. Now, this is going to play an important role in the Kentucky campaign later on in 1862. He was very fixated on Middle Tennessee and the Nashville city and the Nashville-Louisville Railroad. This is his major concern. Okay. Now I told you that Johnson's army retreated down to Corinth, but they weren't, and they assembled all the Confederates that they can possibly assemble, including Polk's force, which was back up in Paducah and had to retreat. He came back down to Corinth. And most importantly, Bragg, who was down in Pensacola, Florida, with about 15,000 Confederate soldiers, he was called to Corinth to consolidate the Confederate army in that town. And by that time, Johnson was in charge, Beauregard was in second in command, and they both decided to attack going north and attack Shiloh at Pittsburgh Landing. Grant was stationed there, not really there, but close by. His soldiers were in Pittsburgh Landing awaiting the arrival of Don Carlos Buell's Army of the Ohio, which was coming down from Nashville. And he took his time. He didn't really arrive there in force until the second day of the battle, but some elements of Buell's command under Nelson arrived earlier and were there late in the day, and especially in the morning of that battle. Now you have to understand that Buell and Grant did not get along. Buell, Grant, and Halleck didn't get along. So there was a problem with command in the Union Army at this particular junction. As you know, in the Battle of Shiloh, which I'm not going to get into, the Confederates retreated back to Corinth April 7th. And when they got there, they finally figured out they couldn't stay there because it was not a good place to have a concentration of troops. And they decided to pull back to Tupelo, Mississippi. Now, while they were there, Beauregard was always complaining about lack of soldiers, not enough support, a bad situation, not a good place. There was no water and no forage and all that kind of stuff. So he was replaced. He was replaced by Braxton Bragg in Tupelo, Mississippi. So we have Bragg in Tupelo, Mississippi with the Confederate Army. And we have Halleck in Corinth with about 110,000 US troops, which is a large concentration of Union soldiers. A couple of things occurred. Let's see if I can move this. No, I can't. Okay. Halleck made some bad decisions. First decision he made was to stay still. He did, as you know, the movement of the Union Army from Shiloh to Corinth took a long time. Halleck would dig in every night. So before they got to Corinth, the Confederates almost figured we better leave. They were faced with a larger force. And there was some fighting there, but it was Union domination. The second decision he made, which is a very bad one, he's decided instead of following the Confederate Army to Tupelo and fight him somewhere in that area, he decided to break up his command, dividing his forces. which was a big mistake. Some of them went back to Nashville. Some of them stayed on the Mississippi River area, and some stayed in Corinth. But he divided the whole army. The Confederates knew this. So when Bragg took control,
wait a minute. Bob, you just stopped your, you need to unmute, and you just stopped my video somehow. Bob, we can't hear you. Okay, you wanna unmute? Click on the little box I sent to you. We're not hearing you, Bob. Okay, I'm sending you a little opportunity to unmute. I can't do that for you at the moment. Okay, Bob, can you hear me? Is anybody hearing me?
I'm hearing you.
Okay,
Yeah.
so,
I'm hearing you.
but is anyone hearing Bob?
No.
Okay, I don't think he realizes that. I'm not sure why he's not hearing us. I'm sending him the little invitation to unmute. Let's see. He's going forward with his presentation. Okay, I'm going to try and call his wife.
Yes.
I'm going to mute simply because I don't want you guys hearing this, but I can't seem to unmute him. He's not responding to my invitation to unmute.
I'm unmuted.
Here you are.
Okay, good. Not sure how that happened, honey.
I don't know what I did.
Okay, so
No, I haven't.
let's see. We left you with Halleck dividing his forces.
But I can't
Three
get back.
parts. Okay, and you're up. You're doing well. Look over. No. Don't go to Perrysville. Go to play.
I'm trying to find play.
Okay, you're
Yeah.
right there.
Okay,
Okay, now click on play.
got it. Okay, I'll
Okay.
be back. Okay. You're all back?
We're all back, and just keep track of that cursor so you don't cut me off
Oh,
again.
there it is. Okay, anyway.
All right.
Okay, so we have Bragg at Tupelo, Mississippi, right? Here's Braxton Bragg. You have that slide?
Yes, we have that slide. Everything's good. You're doing great.
I learned a lot of things about Bragg at this point, which kind of surprised me. You know, Bragg has a big reputation of being kind of a screwball and maybe even insane, but he was very well regarded when he came from Pensacola to Tupelo with 15,000 troops and made commander of the army there in Tupelo, Mississippi, replacing Beauregard. He was a disciplinarian, as you know. He very tough, very undecided. He couldn't make decisions right away. He had a lot of options and he didn't know which ones to take. However, he was pretty well liked by the upper echelons of the Congress and the president of the Confederacy, and that's why he was appointed commander. So he had this reputation that he took with him from his work in the Mexican War. I don't know if you know much about him. He was born kind of a weird place. His mother was born in prison when he was born. He was raised basically by his father, who was very dominant and had a lot of aspirations for him. That might be part of his problem. He graduated from West Point in 1837. And even before the Mexican War, he was court-martialed twice in the Army. Once for criticizing Scott, commander-in-chief. However, with the war breaking out, he served in the Army, did very well, just like Buell, and got a lot of honors in the fight with the Mexicans in the Mexican War. After the war, he was promoted, and he also married a wealthy Southern belle from Mississippi. So he married into money. He resigns the Army in 1855 and moves to Louisiana. He moved to Louisiana. He buys a sugar plantation, obviously owner of a lot of slaves, with his wife's money. And he establishes a military school in New Orleans, and he selects Sherman to be the head of the military school there. And so when the war breaks out, we have Sherman, the head of a military school founded by Braxton Bragg, which is kind of weird. As you know, a lot of historians have commented about Bragg and about his mental problems, which he had. But when he came to Tupelo in 1862, they were in the background. As I said, he was popular because he brought disciplined troops to the area. He disciplined the troops that were in Tupelo, but he had to make some important decisions, just like Halleck had to make important decisions when he was at Corinth. So Bragg had about 3 options to take. The first option was to take the soldiers. He knew he had to do something. He just couldn't stay in Tupelo. He had to take the offensive to fight the Union Army. So the first option he had was to go to Corinth and fight them at Corinth. But that was risky. Even though Halleck had divided his soldiers, he could bring them back pretty quickly, and he had a pretty substantial force of about 45,000 stationed in and around Corinth, Mississippi. That was the first option. The second option was to take back Tennessee. That is, go north around Corinth and around Shiloh, up into Tennessee to try to take back Nashville. That was pretty risky too, because Buell was there and the Army of the Ohio was there. So that was kind of risky. His third option was one that was suggested to him by the Kentucky bloc in Richmond and by events that were occurring in and around Knoxville, Tennessee. It was a very, very risky option. The third option was to go to Chattanooga, which is in eastern Tennessee, go to Chattanooga, assemble the army in Chattanooga, and go north into Tennessee and Kentucky. Very risky. But he decided, due to some circumstances that occurred. One of the circumstances that occurred was Kirby Smith. Whoops. So I find him here. I'll get to him. Kirby Smith. You all heard of Kirby Smith? Okay. Kirby Smith was again involved in the Eastern campaigns, and especially the Battle of Bull Run, the first Battle of Bull Run. He became kind of famous. According to the people that were there, he helped save the day along with Jackson for the Confederate cause. If you speak to Kirby Smith, he saved the day, nobody else. He was very up on himself and thought a lot about himself. So he was involved in the early fighting in the East. In March of 1862, Kirby Smith is sent to Knoxville. Now, that wasn't exactly a prime, a plum assignment. Knoxville was, as you recall, was in the middle of the plateau and mountains of eastern Tennessee. It was in an area where the Unionists were popular. He was sent there to try to bring some organization and to make some moves to help the Southern cause and to recapture the Cumberland Gap. So he's sent to Knoxville, Tennessee. He thought that he could do all these things, and he encouraged Bragg to send the troops to Chattanooga, which was south of Knoxville, and from there to come up and support him, and together they would make this push into eastern Tennessee and Kentucky. By the time, and they had a lot of correspondence between both of them, Smith and Braxton Bragg, but by the time Smith kept pushing Bragg to do this, but Bragg finally decided this was probably the best gambit to do. And he did something quite remarkable. He had about 35,000 troops in Tupelo, Mississippi. And what he decided to do, and I didn't know this, was to organize a train and ferry route, sending divisions and this whole army to Chattanooga. And he accomplished this within 2.5 weeks by sending certain units from his army down to Mobile, going across the bay into, I think, 7 or 8 different railroad trains to Chattanooga. And it was kind of a daring move on his part, going away from Tupelo, only leaving a very token force there and moving the bulk of his army to Tennessee, to Chattanooga. The army was very enthusiastic about this. They felt this was a good move, and this would be a way of getting back at the Yankees and having to go back into Tennessee and Kentucky. So he assembles his army within 2 or 3 or 4 days, weeks, in Chattanooga. And he was going to go north. Meanwhile, Halleck said, well, maybe we should go after Chattanooga and try to prevent this from happening. So he orders Don Carlos Buell from Nashville to go down into northern Alabama and to follow the Tennessee River into Chattanooga through northern Alabama. He didn't want to do this. He felt this was a waste of time. He felt he should stay in Nashville and figure out where Bragg is going to be ending up and then move his army to where Bragg is going to be. He didn't want to go down chasing Bragg all over the place. Okay. So we have, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, but you want to click on play again.
Yeah, I got to go to play. I hit the thing.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. So, the correspondence between Bragg and Smith results in Bragg sending his soldiers up to Kirby Smith and him personally up to Knoxville, and eventually going to what Bragg thought would be the capture of the Cumberland Gap and the capture of eastern Tennessee. He wasn't really too enamored about Kentucky, but he understood that was in the background. Meanwhile, Bragg was coming south from Nashville. He came starting in May of 1862, in June of 1862, he started his army moving south. Now, unfortunately for Bragg and also for Kirby Smith and Bragg and for Buell, it was a very bad summer in the South at that time. There was a big drought. There was scarcity of water. In fact, the Tennessee River, you couldn't, any boats on the Tennessee River, any getting close to Chattanooga. So he had a lot of problems. Not only that, he was being attacked. His line was being attacked by Confederate cavalry, and his whole supply route, which is now overland from Nashville down to Stevenson, Alabama, was being attacked by Confederates, and they were disrupted. So he had to leave a lot of his soldiers defending this supply route as he's moving further south. And he's very, very dissatisfied with the whole idea. He wanted to stay in Nashville, and he wasn't very enthusiastic about this whole thing. So meanwhile, while he's doing this and being, attacked and ambushed as supply lines, Bragg is moving up his army to Kirby Smith. Kind of disingenuous letters were going back and forth. Braxton Bragg thought that Kirby Smith was going to go to the Cumberland Gap, defeat the troops there in the Cumberland Gap, the soldiers, the Union soldiers, and then link up and do something else, maybe in Kentucky. But Kirby Smith had a different idea. He didn't even want to go to the Gap. He wanted to go straight to Kentucky, and he did. And while he was in Kentucky, they had two skirmishes, battles with the Union forces in Kentucky, which were victories. One was at Richmond, Kentucky, which was southeast, way southeast of Lexington, Kentucky. And Kirby Smith was kind of lucky. He had with him probably the most famous brigade commander in the Confederate Army, and later becoming one of the most famous generals in the Confederate Army, and that was Claiborne. And Claiborne's troops were very good. They were very well organized. They were veterans, and they were able to give Kirby Smith a victory. The second thing that happened that made Kentucky very tempting was that John Hunt Morgan in June of 1862 got his cavalry together, about 900 men, and they went throughout Kentucky, the Bluegrass region, behind the Union lines, just as Jeb Stuart did in the East, and wreaked havoc with the Union troops, panicked all the Unionists in Kentucky, and encouraged Bragg to follow up on Kirby's victories and to move the army, Bragg's army, into Kentucky. So now we have the Kentucky campaign of 1862. They were going to meet up, and they didn't really know where their objective was going to be, but it was somewhere, probably Lexington, Kentucky, which is south of Louisville. Louisville was kind of strong because it was right on the Ohio River, and it was a mustering point for Union soldiers. There was a call sent out because of Kirby's approaches. There was a call sent out to the governors of Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois for more troops. More troops were sent to Louisville. They were all raw troops, not trained in any way. They were just sent there to try to appease the Kentucky Unionists, who were really nervous at this time with the Confederate Army approaching central Kentucky. Meanwhile, Don Carlos Buell was back in Nashville. He was told to come to the aid of the Union forces in Kentucky. So there's a big foot race between the soldiers of Kirby Smith and Bragg in eastern Kentucky, and Buell and his veterans from Nashville up to eastern Kentucky. And whoever's going to get there first will probably control the very important Nashville-Louisville Railroad. And Buell was following the railroad north to Louisville, Kentucky. The race was won by Buell. He got there a couple of days before Smith. He had about 70,000 troops in Louisville, and he had enough men, he felt, to go south and I'm going the wrong way. To go south and to, there we go. Here's the roots of their armies, Buell's and Bragg's army. Bragg is the red, and Buell was the following the railroad, the blue, from Nashville. And you can see they were really close to each other, not very far apart. And again, it was a foot race. And Buell got to Louisville, able to get the soldiers together, and he was going to leave Louisville, find Bragg, and attack him. And here we had the Battle of Perryville in October 8th and 9th of 1862. And there's a map of the battle. It was kind of a complicated affair. A lot of the Union Army was organized 3 corps, and he had 3 corps going down different routes, trying to find where Bragg was, and Bragg was trying to find where Buell was. They finally ended up in Perryville, which was called the high water mark of the Confederacy in the West. The battle lasted 2 days. I'm not going to go into the battle. It lasted 2 days. The first day, the Confederates were very successful. They were fighting in an area where the population was mostly pro-South. So they had a lot of support from the local population. And the Union armies did not, but they had the superiority, they had more men. On the second day, both armies disengaged and there was a retreat. Buell was encouraged to follow Bragg to Eastern Tennessee. Eastern Tennessee was a big idea that these people back in Washington, D.C. said he should really go to Eastern Tennessee. Bragg said, no, I'm not going to Eastern Tennessee. He disregarded the orders and fell back to his favorite spot, Nashville, Tennessee. And actually, he had the right idea because the Confederate Army did not go to Eastern Tennessee. They were heading for Bowling Green, so on the map. So Bragg had the right idea. I mean, Buell had the right idea that he was really cutting off the attack of the Confederates in central Kentucky. He was, because of his insubordination, in December of 1862, he's replaced. Orders are sent out that he should be not the commander of the army anymore. And Rosecrans was to be the new commander of the army. But it's kind of a funny order because they said you really shouldn't take over the army if Bragg is attacking or if Bragg is involved with the enemy. Kind of weird. So he wasn't really replaced, in fact, until he got to Nashville, where Rosecrans took over. Buell leaves the army. As you know, later on, there's a lot of inquiries about what happened in Kentucky and what happened at the Battle of Perryville. And he's come under a lot. Buell has came under a lot of investigation about his conducts. Rosecrans gets to takes the command of the army in Nashville, and the outcome of this whole thing is that Kentucky remains Union, although it was officially a border state. Bragg moves his army toward Middle Tennessee, not to Knoxville. The gap remained, the Cumberland Gap stays in Union hands. Stanton creates the Army of the Cumberland and puts Rosecrans in charge of it at that time in Nashville. And he decides, Rosecrans in December 26th decides to leave Nashville and attack Bragg. Bragg by this time was down in Murfreesboro, we call the Battle of Stones River, in December of the 31st of 1862 to October 1st and 2nd, 1863. There's a big battle there in Stones River, which the Confederates had to retreat from. So the outcomes are pretty positive. The Kentucky campaign was an attempt by the Confederate Army, by the government in Richmond, to retake or bring back into the Southern cause the Kentucky. They failed, and Kentucky remained, quote, pro-Union, although it was officially a border state. And as you know, a lot of the battles took place in Missouri. It was also a border state, and in Maryland, but I think Kentucky was the key state that they had to really maintain Union presence because it was so close to the Ohio River and to the Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. And Kentucky had a lot of resources that the Union can use to help fight the war. As I said, by December 1862, the Union Army in Kentucky and in Nashville strengthened, and they got more and more reinforcements. And Grant by this time was working his way down the Mississippi, so there would be an attack there too. But it was very, very important that Rosecrans took over the army and stopped Buell at the Battle of Stones River, and the Confederates had to retreat further south again. This whole idea of going to Chattanooga did not leave the minds of the Union Army or the Union or the Congress. And in 1864, Sherman goes to Chattanooga and goes from there down to Atlanta. So we have this whole central part of the western part of the Confederacy being cut in half. But I think the Battle of Perryville was an important step in that direction of keeping Kentucky in the Union. It was kind of had a lot of casualties. I don't have the statistics with me. Maybe I do. Let's see. I don't have the statistics, but there were a lot of casualties from both sides in that fight. Not as much as the ones coming later on in Gettysburg, but it was called the high watermark of the Western Confederacy. That's it. Okay, have any questions?
Okay, that was great. I just want to make a comment here, Bob, and to everybody, since I lived in Tennessee for a bazillion years. It's actually from Nashville to Chattanooga on the Tennessee River. You're going upriver. You're
That's
not
right.
going down.
Right.
And that was part of the issue. He was going upriver. And when you get to Muscle Shoals, it is an intense area of just that. It's not so much waterfalls as very, very not deep, shallow shoals. And if there's a drought, you can't get boats over it at all. You are portaging. And I mean, I can't remember how long Muscle Shoals is, but I'm thinking it's miles.
Yeah, it's pretty long.
Like miles, like 8 miles or something. It's an intense area.
And you're also in Eastern Tennessee, you're also hitting the plateau and the mountains. So it even made it worse. The roads were terrible to get to Chattanooga.
Well, they're still terrible. They don't exist. Okay, how about stop sharing your screen so we can all see each other and maybe people can make comments and ask questions. How would that be? So you stop screen, look at the top of your, there you go. Nope, even more up. Look at the very top and you should see view options. View options, right at the top above that part of your screen. No. You're on your, look at the Zoom part.
Right there?
Your screen.
Stop share on the bottom. Should I do that?
Yeah, let's do that.
There you are.
Lovely.
Okay.
Well done, Robert. Thank you.
It's very complicated.